It was a quiet night, the kind that settled over the city like a thick, soft blanket. The streetlights flickered faintly as I sat at my kitchen table, sipping the last bit of cold coffee from my mug. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 8 p.m. Not too late, but just enough for me to finish my errands before the store started winding down. The evening had been uneventful so far, and I wasn't in the mood for anything too complicated. I had a few things I needed to pick up: toothpaste, some shampoo, bread, and a few snacks for the week. I hadn't made it to the store in a few days, and now I was starting to run low on basic necessities. Walmart was just a short drive away, and I figured I could be in and out without much trouble. I grabbed my jacket, slipped on my shoes, and headed out the door. The drive to Walmart was quick, and the store wasn't crowded when I arrived. I parked near the entrance, took a deep breath, and stepped out of my car. The store had that familiar scent of fresh produce, cleaning supplies, and warm air that always greeted me when I walked inside. I entered through the right side doors, heading straight for the health and beauty section, which was conveniently located right at the front of the store. I grabbed the toothpaste and moved quickly to the next aisle. I spotted the shampoo I needed, quickly tossed it into my cart, and was about to leave when I remembered the bread. I made my way across the store to the grocery section. The aisles were lined with all kinds of food, from canned goods to fresh vegetables, but I wasn't paying much attention to any of it. I was just focused on getting what I needed. As I walked, I noticed a woman behind me. She wasn't directly behind me, but she was close enough that it caught my attention. She was shorter than me, with blonde hair, wearing a black sweater and jeans. At first, I thought nothing of it, just another shopper going about her business. But the more I walked, the more I noticed her presence. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but somehow it felt like she was always a few steps behind. I shrugged it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. It was a busy store, after all. People walked around each other all the time. But as I moved further into the store, something started to feel off. I continued walking through the aisles, my mind still preoccupied with the items on my list. But every time I turned a corner or glanced around, I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman was still behind me. She wasn't close enough to be directly on my heels, but she was always there, trailing a few steps behind. My steps slowed as I glanced back at her, but she quickly averted her eyes, pretending to study the products on the shelves nearby. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was just a coincidence, but something about the situation didn't sit right with me. I picked up a pack of crackers and lingered in the aisle, watching her out of the corner of my eye. She seemed to be looking at a bag of flour, but I could tell she wasn't really paying attention to it. Her gaze kept drifting toward me, as if she were waiting for me to move first. I quickly decided to head back to the health products aisle to grab the shampoo I'd forgotten earlier. As I turned down the aisle, I felt a surge of unease. There she was, entering the same aisle just as I did, her blonde hair catching the overhead lights. She wasn't buying anything. No basket, no cart. Just standing there, a few feet away from me. Now there was no doubt. She was following me. I stood still for a moment, trying to figure out what to do. My heart pounded in my chest as I debated whether to confront her. Maybe she was just a weird shopper, or perhaps she worked for Walmart and was following me for some reason. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. I decided to confront her, to ask what her deal was. As I took a few steps toward her, she looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. Without a word, she turned quickly and darted down another aisle, disappearing into the sea of shelves. I stood there for a moment, completely taken aback. My heart raced, and for a split second I wasn't sure if I should follow her or just leave the store. But the feeling of being watched was too strong to ignore. I wasn't going to just let this weirdness slide. Something was off, and I had to know what was going on. I decided to follow her. I moved quickly, turning down the same aisle she had disappeared into, trying to catch a glimpse of her. But she was gone. It was as if she had vanished. I walked a few more steps, my eyes scanning the aisles. That's when I saw her again, at the far end of the store, near the pet supplies aisle. She was standing still, pretending to look at some dog food, but her posture was stiff. It was like she was waiting for something. Waiting for me, maybe. At this point, I wasn't just curious anymore. I was frustrated, and the unease I had been feeling earlier now bloomed into full-blown anxiety. Why was she following me? I started walking toward her, making my way through the aisles with purpose. As I got closer, I saw her glance up, and her eyes widened in a way that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Without warning, she turned around and walked quickly in the opposite direction. Her footsteps hurried and sharp against the linoleum floor. I called out, "Excuse me," but she didn't stop. She kept walking, faster now, as though she was desperate to get away. I hurried after her, but she disappeared around the corner, vanishing into another aisle. I stood there for a moment, my breath shallow. What was going on? Why was she acting like this? Why didn't she just say something? I stood there in the aisle, staring at the spot where she had disappeared. My pulse thudded in my ears, and the store around me suddenly felt too large, too empty. The fluorescent lights above hummed, and the quiet murmur of other shoppers seemed distant. It was as if the woman had vanished into thin air, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still watching me from somewhere. I couldn't let this go. My feet moved before I even had time to think. I turned the corner and headed back toward the health products aisle, where I had originally started. I grabbed the shampoo I needed, though my hands were shaky as I scanned the shelves. I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept drifting back to the woman. Why had she been following me? And why did she act so strangely when I tried to confront her? Just as I was about to leave the aisle, I saw her again. She was standing by the checkout, pretending to inspect a bottle of hand sanitizer, but she wasn't looking at it. Her eyes were on me. A chill ran down my spine. She wasn't even trying to hide anymore. I knew I had to leave, but my legs felt heavy, reluctant to move. As I walked toward the checkout, I kept glancing over my shoulder. I couldn't stop myself. She was still there, always in the periphery, like a shadow that refused to disappear. I quickly checked out, paying for the shampoo and a few other random items I didn't really need. But as I walked toward the exit, the feeling of being followed was overwhelming. I couldn't resist one last glance over my shoulder. There she was, standing near the door, no items in her hands. She was staring right at me, and I knew, without a doubt, that she was still following me. I stepped through the automatic doors, my heart pounding in my chest. The cool night air hit me like a rush, but it did nothing to calm the rising panic inside me. I could feel her presence like a weight pressing down on my shoulders. She was still there, and I couldn't escape it. I glanced behind me as I walked toward my car, my mind racing. I told myself I was being paranoid. It was probably just a coincidence, but every step I took seemed to echo with the feeling that I wasn't alone. Then, as I reached my car and pulled open the door, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. She was walking toward the parking lot, heading straight for the doors. She didn't have any bags, no cart, nothing in her hands at all. It was like she wasn't even shopping. She was just walking and watching. I quickly got in the car, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked the doors, trying to steady my breath. Was she really following me? Or was I just losing my mind? I started the engine, glancing in the rearview mirror. There she was. She was getting into a car too, and she was driving behind me as I pulled out of the parking lot. I tried to tell myself I was being ridiculous, but the car behind me stayed with me as I made my way down the road. I made a few turns, testing the waters, seeing if she would follow. And she did every time. No matter where I went, she was there. The same car, the same strange feeling of being hunted. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled over to the side of the road, my nerves frayed and my heart racing. As soon as I stopped, she did too. I took a deep breath, and without thinking, I got out of my car and started walking toward hers. Then, just like that, she slammed her car into drive, nearly hitting me as she sped away. She didn't stop, didn't even hesitate. She just drove off, as if she had been waiting for me to make a move. But it wasn't over. I wasn't ready to go home yet. Hi, I'm Adam, and this story happened when I was just 21 years old. Back then, I worked part-time as a cashier at Walmart while going to college. It wasn't the most exciting job, but it helped pay the bills. My shifts were pretty random, some mornings, some afternoons, but most often I worked evenings. I didn't mind the routine, though. It gave me enough time to balance school and work without feeling overwhelmed. One Friday evening, I clocked in for my usual 4 to 10 p.m. shift. The store was bustling as usual, with families shopping for the weekend and a few regulars stopping by for their groceries. I remember the smell of freshly baked bread from the bakery section and the faint hum of conversation filling the air. My register was near the middle of the store, so I had a good view of the comings and goings of the customers. Around 9 p.m., the crowd began to thin. I was scanning items for a young couple when I noticed a man lingering near the self-checkout area. He wasn't buying anything, just standing there, watching. I tried not to think too much of it. People often spaced out in the store while waiting for someone or deciding what to buy. A few minutes later, the man got into my lane. He looked older, probably in his late 40s, with messy brown hair and tired eyes. His clothes were a bit wrinkled, and his cart held a random mix of items: a 6-pack of soda, a bag of chips, and a can of soup. When it was his turn, he gave me a smile. It wasn't warm or friendly. It felt off, like he knew something I didn't. Then, he said something that caught me completely off guard. "I've been watching you," he said. It wasn't a compliment. It was a statement, and it sent a chill down my spine. His words hung in the air, making my stomach churn. "I've been watching you." I forced a nervous laugh, trying to stay polite. "Oh? Well, I guess I work here a lot." He didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned in closer, his eyes fixed on mine. "You're here every time I come in. You're always so focused. I like that." I kept scanning his items, desperate to finish the transaction. "Well, I hope you found everything you needed today," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Instead of answering, he asked, "Do you want to go out with me?" His question threw me off. It wasn't just the words. It was how casually he said them, like he expected me to say yes. "I don't think so," I said, forcing a polite smile and handing him his receipt. "Why not?" he pressed, his tone shifting. "It'll be fun. I'll show you a good time." "I'm sorry, but no," I said firmly, meeting his eyes for the first time. There was something about his stare, intense, almost angry, that made my skin crawl. Finally, he shrugged, grabbed his bag, and walked away. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The rest of my shift passed uneventfully, but his words stayed with me. When I clocked out at 10 p.m., I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I kept glancing over my shoulder as I walked to my car, half expecting to see him lurking somewhere. I drove home quickly, relieved to lock the door behind me. But as I settled in for the night, a thought crossed my mind that made my heart race. What if he wasn't finished? I tried to push the thought out of my mind as I sat on the couch, flipping through channels to distract myself. My apartment was small but cozy, just a one-bedroom place with a living room, a tiny kitchen, and a bathroom. It wasn't much, but it was mine. After about 10 minutes, I finally started to relax. I convinced myself I was overthinking it. Maybe the guy was just weird and didn't mean any harm. But then, there was a knock at the door. It was soft at first, just a light tap, tap, tap. My heart jumped. I wasn't expecting anyone. Who would visit this late at night? I got up slowly and walked toward the door. When I peeked through the peephole, my stomach dropped. It was him. He stood there, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets, looking around nervously. My hands started shaking as I stepped back from the door. I didn't know what to do. "Hey, I know you're in there," he called out, his voice muffled through the door. Come on, just open up, I just want to talk. I stayed silent, hoping he'd go away, but he didn't. He knocked again, louder this time. Don't ignore me, he yelled, his tone sharper now. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the dispatcher as I tried to keep my voice steady. There's a man outside my apartment. He followed me home from work, and he won't leave. The dispatcher assured me that officers were on their way. Meanwhile, the man kept pounding on the door, shouting things I couldn't quite make out. I stood there, heart racing, waiting for help to arrive. The pounding on my door grew louder and more desperate. Each knock felt like it echoed through my chest, making it harder to breathe. I know you're in there, he shouted, his voice filled with anger now. Why won't you just talk to me? I stood frozen, clutching my phone like a lifeline as the dispatcher stayed on the line. The officers are close, she assured me. Just stay calm and don't open the door. Minutes felt like hours as I listened to him pace back and forth outside. Then I heard a terrifying sound, the doorknob rattling. My heart felt like it might explode. He was trying to open the door. Stop! I yelled through the door, surprising even myself. The police are on their way. For a moment, everything went quiet. Then, as if realizing I wasn't bluffing, I heard him mutter something under his breath and step away. I thought maybe he was leaving, but then I saw the shadow of his figure lingering outside my window. He wasn't gone. He was just waiting. Finally, red and blue lights flashed outside. Relief washed over me as two officers pulled up in their patrol car. They got out and approached him immediately. Sir, what are you doing here? One of them asked firmly. I was lost, he stammered, his demeanor shifting from aggressive to sheepish. I thought this was my friend's place. The officer didn't buy it. Do you know this person? He asked, motioning to my door. No, I said loudly through the door, still too scared to open it. He followed me home from work. The officers told him to stay put and came to my door. You're safe now, one of them said gently. But I wasn't sure I felt safe at all. I finally opened the door, my hands still trembling. The officers stood there, calm but serious. One of them stayed with me while the other turned back to the man outside. Do you want to press charges? The officer asked me softly. I hesitated. I didn't know what to say. This man had terrified me, but he hadn't physically hurt me. Still, the thought of him coming back made my stomach turn. I just want him gone, I whispered. The officer nodded. We'll make sure of that. The man outside was still trying to explain himself. I wasn't doing anything wrong, he said, his voice defensive. I just wanted to talk to him. Following someone home and refusing to leave is harassment, the second officer replied firmly. You're lucky this didn't escalate further. They took his ID and ran his information, then informed him that he was officially banned from the apartment complex. If you come back here, you'll be arrested, one of them warned. After what felt like forever, they escorted him to his car and waited until he drove away. Even then, I couldn't shake the fear that he might return. The officers reassured me. We've documented everything. If he bothers you again, call us immediately. They gave me their direct contact number before leaving. The next day, I went to my manager at Walmart and told her everything. She was horrified and promised to ban the man from the store as well. Over the next few weeks, I stayed on high alert. I checked my locks twice before bed and looked over my shoulder whenever I left work. Thankfully, I never saw him again. But even now, years later, I still double-check my surroundings. Some things just stay with you. It was a cold evening in January, and I had just finished dinner at home. The heater hummed softly and everything felt peaceful. I realized I needed batteries for my flashlight, just in case the power went out during one of those winter storms Rockwell was known for. The small convenience store down the block called Frank's Stop and Shop was my go-to spot for quick errands. I decided to walk since it wasn't far, and the streets in our town were always quiet and safe. The cold air bit at my face as I stepped outside, pulling my jacket tighter around me. The sky was a deep gray, with only a few dim stars peeking through the haze. Rockwell didn't have much nightlife. Most houses had their curtains drawn, and the streets were empty except for the occasional car passing by. When I reached the store, the automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and the warmth inside was a relief. The faint smell of cleaning products and the buzzing of fluorescent lights filled the air. There was hardly anyone there, a young cashier at the counter scrolling through her phone, and an older man inspecting the canned goods. I grabbed the batteries from the rack near the register, then decided to pick up a candy bar too. It was just a quick errand and everything felt normal, ordinary even. As I paid for my items and walked toward the door, I noticed a man standing just outside. He leaned on a rusty bicycle, his crutch propped against it. His worn green jacket looked thin against the cold, and his face was lined with age. "Hey you," he called, waving at me. "Can you give me a hand?" At first I wasn't sure if he was talking to me. I looked around, but there was no one else nearby. His voice was calm, almost friendly. "Yeah, you," he said again, gesturing with a faint smile. I could use a hand loading some stuff into my van. My leg's been giving me trouble. I hesitated, glancing at the crutch leaning against his bike. He did seem to be struggling, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Helping him seemed like the right thing to do. "Sure," I replied, stepping closer. "Where's your van?" He motioned toward the side of the parking lot, away from the brighter, busier section. "Just around the corner. Shouldn't take but a minute." He picked up his crutch and began hobbling along. I fell in step beside him, trying to match his slow, uneven pace. "Thank you," he said, his voice softer now. "Most people would just ignore me." "It's no problem," I said, glancing at him. His scruffy beard and weathered face made him look older than I'd initially thought. He wore a faint smile, but his eyes seemed distant, like he was lost in thought. As we walked, the lively sounds of the store faded behind us. The bright parking lot lights grew dimmer, replaced by shadows cast by the building's edge. I glanced back over my shoulder. The cashier was still inside, head down, scrolling on her phone. "So, why'd you park so far away?" I asked, trying to fill the silence. "Easier to get in and out over here," he replied, his tone casual. I nodded, but something about the quietness around us made my stomach tighten. Still, I followed him, telling myself this would be over soon. We rounded the corner of the building and there it was, a white van parked near the loading dock. It looked old, with chipped paint and a dented bumper. The shadows around the area made it hard to see clearly, but something about the van made me uneasy. "Here we are," the man said, his voice a little too cheerful. He hobbled forward, his crutch scraping against the ground. "Why park all the way back here?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. My eyes scanned the area, but there was no one else in sight. "It's quieter back here," he said. "No one's fighting for spots. Makes it easier for me with my leg." I nodded, even though the explanation didn't sit right with me. This was the kind of place you'd expect delivery trucks to park, not a random van. Still, I pushed the uneasy feeling aside and followed him. "Just grab the handle and pull it open," he said, pointing to the back door of the van. I hesitated for a second, but reached out and pulled the handle. The door creaked as it swung open and I peeked inside. It was completely empty. No groceries, no supplies, just an old, hollow van. "There's nothing in here," I said, turning to face him. His expression had changed. The friendly, harmless demeanor was gone. His jaw tightened, and his eyes darkened as he stepped closer. "Get in," he said, his voice cold and commanding. I took a step back. "What?" "Get in the van," he repeated, more forceful this time. My heart raced as I realized something was terribly wrong. That's when I heard the sound of another door opening, and I turned to see someone stepping out of the passenger side. My stomach dropped as the passenger door creaked open. A second man stepped out of the van, tall and broad-shouldered, with a sinister grin spread across his face. He cracked his knuckles as he approached, his boots echoing ominously against the pavement. "Look what we've got here," he said, his voice low and mocking. I instinctively stepped back, my hands trembling as I gripped the handle of the cart I'd been pushing. The first man tossed his crutch aside, standing upright with ease. My chest tightened as the realization hit. His injury had been a lie, a setup. "What do you want?" I stammered, my voice shaking. The second man laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, just a little chat. Don't make it difficult." I glanced around, desperately searching for a way out, but the area was completely isolated. The store's bright lights seemed miles away, and no one else was in sight. The first man lunged toward me, grabbing the sleeve of my jacket. "I said get in," he barked, his tone leaving no room for argument. "No!" I screamed, yanking my arm free. Adrenaline surged through me, and I bolted, my feet pounding against the pavement. Behind me, I heard the men shouting and the heavy thud of their footsteps as they gave chase. "Get back here!" one of them yelled, his voice laced with anger. I ran faster than I ever thought possible, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The parking lot felt endless, and every shadow seemed to stretch toward me. Ahead, I spotted the faint outline of a chain-link fence at the edge of the property. It was my only chance. I sprinted toward it, praying I'd make it in time. The fence loomed closer, a barrier between me and freedom. My legs burned, and my chest heaved with every frantic breath. Behind me, the men's shouts grew louder. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't afford to lose even a second. I reached the chain-link fence and grabbed the cold, rusted metal. My fingers ached as I began to climb, each rung feeling like an eternity. The metal scraped against my palms, but I didn't stop. "You're not getting away," one of the men yelled, his voice dripping with fury. A quick glance over my shoulder revealed the taller man closing in fast, his hand outstretched as if he could yank me down. I kicked hard, my shoe slipping on the metal, but it gave me the extra push I needed to hoist myself over the top. The descent was rough. I landed awkwardly, my ankle twisting slightly as I hit the ground. Pain shot up my leg, but I didn't stop. I forced myself to run, hobbling across the patch of grass separating the fence from the main road. The sound of their footsteps halted at the fence. I dared a quick glance back. Both men stood there, watching me with cold, calculating eyes. The taller one gripped the fence, shaking it violently, while the other just stared, his face dark with anger. I reached the sidewalk, my heart still racing. The main road was empty, but I wasn't taking any chances. Pulling out my phone, I dialed 911, my fingers trembling as I explained everything to the operator. "Stay where you are," she instructed. "Officers are on their way." I stayed on the move, putting as much distance between me and the store as I could. Relief washed over me when I finally saw flashing red and blue lights approaching. The police car pulled up with a sharp screech, its headlights flooding the dark road. 2 officers stepped out, their expressions calm but focused. I ran toward them, my heart still pounding in my chest. "They're back there," I blurted, pointing toward the store. 2 men. They tried to force me into a van." The taller officer, a man with a gruff voice, nodded. "Stay here," he said firmly. "We'll check it out." The second officer, a woman with sharp eyes, stayed with me as her partner headed toward the loading dock. She offered me a bottle of water and asked me to recount everything. My words came out in a jumbled rush, but she listened carefully, jotting notes on a small pad. Minutes felt like hours as we waited for the other officer to return. When he finally did, his face was grim. "The van's gone," he said. "No sign of anyone back there." A cold wave of dread washed over me. "They were right there," I insisted. "Both of them." The officer nodded. "We believe you. We'll review the store's surveillance footage and increase patrols in the area. You did the right thing calling us." They offered to drive me home, and I gratefully accepted. The ride was silent, except for the crackle of their radio. My mind raced, replaying the night's events over and over. When we reached my house, the female officer gave me her card. "If you remember anything else, Call us. And be careful." I thanked them and went inside, locking every door and window. Despite the safety of my home, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, watching, waiting. That night, I barely slept, haunted by shadows and the cold realization of how close I'd come to disappearing forever. It was my routine, working the overnight shift at Walmart. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work. I worked at the Walmart Supercenter on the outskirts of town, a place that was open 24 hours, making it a lifeline for those working odd hours or needing something last minute. I was no different. My son's school schedule meant that I couldn't work regular hours, so I took the late shift from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. every night. It wasn't ideal, but it helped cover the rent, and it allowed me to still be there for him when he woke up in the morning. The first few hours of the shift were always the hardest. The store was busy enough, with people picking up snacks or grabbing things they'd forgotten during the day. But as the night went on, the crowd thinned, and the store would become quieter and quieter. It was during those quiet hours when I often felt the most uneasy. The store felt massive at night, empty spaces echoing with every movement. The hum of the overhead lights seemed too loud in the stillness. By 2 a.m., the place was mostly deserted, and the weirdos would come out of the woodwork. People who didn't seem to belong in a place like this. The kind of people who wandered the aisles slowly, their eyes glazed over as if they were in some kind of trance. I would stalk the shelves, making my way through the aisles, always keeping a lookout for anything strange. The aisles felt like corridors in a haunted mansion. I knew the store's layout like the back of my hand, but every corner seemed darker at night, every shadow more mysterious. It was hard not to jump at every little noise or figure moving in the distance. That night, the store felt particularly lonely. The last few customers had left, and it was just me and the few other night workers, all silently going about our tasks. That's when I noticed him. At first, I didn't think much of him. He was just another customer lingering in the cereal aisle like so many others who came in for a quick snack in the middle of the night. But something about him stood out. Maybe it was the way he didn't seem to be in any particular hurry. He didn't grab a cart, didn't pick up anything at all, and just wandered aimlessly, his large backpack bulging like he was carrying something heavy. His curly hair framed his face in an unkempt way, and his eyes seemed distant, unfocused. I went back to stocking the shelves, trying not to let my gaze linger on him too long. But as I worked, I caught glimpses of him out of the corner of my eye. He wasn't just walking through the aisles, he kept passing by me again and again like he was looking for something, or someone. The strange thing was, he wasn't picking up anything. No cereal, no snacks, nothing. He just kept walking back and forth slowly, almost as if he was waiting for something to happen. I tried to ignore it. I was used to the oddballs that came through at night, but this guy felt different. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I finished stocking the cereal aisle quickly and grabbed my empty cart, hoping to get away from him. I moved to another aisle, the chips section this time. I figured it would be safer, further from the odd behavior I'd just witnessed. But when I turned the corner, there he was again. He was standing at the end of the aisle, staring at me. No bread, no snacks, just his backpack and that unsettling gaze. I froze, unsure of what to do. He didn't seem to be looking for anything specific. He was just watching me. I quickly looked away, hoping he'd lose interest, but it didn't work. He started walking toward me, and that's when I knew things were about to get even stranger. As he approached, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. His movements were slow, almost deliberate, and the air around us seemed to grow heavier with each step. I kept my eyes focused on the shelves in front of me, hoping he'd just walk by, but of course he didn't. He stopped right in front of me, a few feet away, and his gaze didn't waver. I forced myself to look up at him, trying to stay calm. He opened his mouth, and his voice, low and scratchy, made my skin crawl. "I've been watching you," he said, his words lingering in the air like a bad smell. "You're really beautiful. You know that?" I couldn't help but flinch. I'd had weird encounters before, but this one was different. His tone wasn't playful or friendly. It was possessive, as if he thought he had the right to say whatever he wanted to me. I tried to give a polite smile, but it felt fake, forced. Thank you," I muttered, not knowing how else to respond. But he didn't stop there. He started asking me questions, personal questions. "Where are you from? Do you have a boyfriend?" I gave him short, vague answers, praying he would take the hint and leave. But he didn't. He kept coming closer, leaning in like he was trying to be intimate. I could feel my stomach twist in knots as he invaded my personal space. His breath was foul, like it hadn't seen a toothbrush in days. "Can I have your number?" he asked, his eyes practically glowing with eagerness. I tried to make myself clear, telling him I was seeing someone, but it didn't faze him. "We can just be friends," he insisted. At that point, I was desperate to end the conversation. I quickly lied, giving him a fake number. He smiled like he had won something, but it was all a lie. I just needed him to go away. I thought that was the end of it. I had given him the fake number, said the polite things, and hoped he'd leave. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The air felt heavy with tension as I continued stocking the shelves, my hands trembling slightly. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see him again. The store was quieter now, and I was starting to feel trapped, like I couldn't escape the weird energy he had left behind. Hours passed. The night dragged on, but it felt like time was moving in slow motion. My shift was almost over, and I just wanted to go home. But then, my walkie-talkie crackled to life. It was another worker, her voice filled with panic. "There's a creepy guy asking for you at the front," she said. "He's not leaving. What do you want me to do?" I felt a jolt of fear shoot through me. "No," I responded quickly. "Tell him I'm not here. I left already." But as I hung up the walkie-talkie, my gut told me I wasn't getting away that easily. I needed to hide. I grabbed my things and rushed to the employee lounge, hoping that he wouldn't follow me there. My heart raced with each step as I ducked through the store, trying to blend into the shadows. I was almost to the lounge when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. I turned, and there he was, his angry expression locking onto mine. He had found me. "You gave me a fake number," he yelled, his voice filled with rage. My blood ran cold. I didn't know what to do. I tried to back away, but he wasn't done. He dropped his backpack on the table in front of me, unzipping it slowly, almost like he was savoring the moment. My stomach churned, and I knew, whatever was in that bag, it wasn't good. I had to run. Without thinking, I bolted. I didn't care what he was planning. I just needed to escape. I didn't think. I just ran. My heart hammered in my chest as I sprinted through the store, pushing past shelves and aisles, my legs moving faster than I ever thought possible. I heard his footsteps behind me, heavy and determined, getting closer. My breath was ragged, my body trembling with fear. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't. I just focused on getting out, getting to the front doors where I could escape. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered as I dashed through the aisles, but the sound of his footsteps grew louder, closer. I could feel his presence like a shadow looming over me. Panic surged in my veins, making everything feel like a blur. All I could think about was the door, the sweet freedom just a few steps away. When I finally reached the front, I slammed my hands against the automatic doors, desperate for them to open. They slid apart with a soft whoosh, and I burst outside into the cool night air. My car was parked just a few spaces away. I didn't even stop to look around. I ran straight to it, throwing myself into the driver's seat and locking the doors behind me. I could see him in the distance, moving slowly toward the entrance, still scanning the parking lot like he knew I was somewhere nearby. I started the engine, my hands shaking so much I almost couldn't grip the steering wheel. My mind was spinning as I put the car into reverse and sped out of the lot, leaving him behind. I called the night manager as soon as I was safely on the road, telling him everything that had just happened. I was shaken, my voice trembling as I explained the encounter and warned him about the guy with the backpack. The manager promised to call the police and said he'd check the security footage, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't safe. Not yet. I didn't go back to the store that night. I couldn't. The fear still clung to me like a nightmare I couldn't escape. It was an unusually peaceful Sunday morning. The kind of morning where everything felt calm and the world seemed to still be half asleep. The clock read 7:30 a.m. when I decided it was the perfect time to head to Walmart. I usually preferred to go early on weekends to avoid the typical crowds. The rush of people, the long lines, the noise, it all felt overwhelming, especially on a Sunday. So, waking up early and heading out felt like the best choice. The roads were nearly empty as I drove through town, and the stores were still quiet, just waiting for the chaos to begin. I parked my car in the front row of the lot, a spot I liked because it was convenient, even if it wasn't the closest to the entrance. Walking into Walmart, I grabbed a cart and started moving through the aisles. It was much quieter than I expected. There were a few other shoppers scattered here and there, but it wasn't packed, and there was no sense of urgency. It felt like the perfect morning for a solo shopping trip. I took my time, casually picking up the things I needed: some bread, milk, fruit, and a few other odds and ends. The store's hum was like a background soundtrack to my quiet morning. There was something calming about the soft sound of beeping scanners, the slight shuffle of other shoppers' feet, and the soft music playing overhead. Everything seemed completely normal, until I reached the dish soap aisle. As I turned the corner into the aisle, I noticed him right away. A man, sitting on the edge of the aisle, almost like he was waiting for someone. He was heavy-set, wearing a dark jacket, and what caught me most was the way he was staring at me. It wasn't a casual glance or an absent look. His eyes were locked on me, and there was something unnerving about it. I tried to shake it off, assuming maybe he was just lost in thought. I tried to convince myself that the man was just waiting for someone, that there was nothing strange about him sitting in the aisle. But the longer I stood there, looking at the dish soaps, the more I could feel his gaze burning into the back of my neck. I quickly grabbed a bottle of soap and moved on, telling myself to focus on my shopping. After all, it was just a coincidence, right? But then, as I made my way to the cereal aisle, I noticed something odd. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him again, standing a few aisles away, not exactly close, but still in the same vicinity. His eyes were fixed on me once more, and this time, I felt a shiver run down my spine. He wasn't just casually shopping, he was watching me. I tried to brush it off, picking up my cereal and moving toward the next aisle, but when I glanced over my shoulder, he was still there, trailing behind at a distance. It was almost like he was following me, but not too closely, just enough to be noticed. I felt my heart start to race, and the uneasy feeling in my stomach grew. Maybe I was imagining things, but it felt intentional. Every time I turned a corner, I would catch a glimpse of him, still at least 20 feet away, but always there. The space between us was constant, like he was keeping track of my movements without actually getting too close. The store felt less like a safe place now and more like a maze with no exit. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was following me, and no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the awareness of his presence made everything feel wrong. I wanted to hurry up and finish my shopping, but somehow it seemed impossible to escape his watchful eyes. As I continued to shop, my mind kept racing. Every aisle I walked down, every item I picked up, I couldn't shake the feeling that the man was right behind me, watching my every move. I tried to focus on my list, on getting what I needed, but it was like I couldn't escape his presence. The store had started to feel suffocating, and with each glance over my shoulder, he was still there, always a few steps behind, never too close, but never far enough to make me feel at ease. When I reached the frozen food section, I thought I might be imagining things. But when I turned to grab a bag of peas, I saw him again, Standing just a few feet away, his eyes locked on mine. This time there was no mistaking it. He was definitely following me. I could feel my pulse quicken, my body tense with nervous energy. What did he want? Why was he doing this? I tried to speed up my shopping, hoping that if I moved quickly enough, I could finish and get out of there. But no matter what I did, he stayed right behind me. It wasn't just the fact that he was following me. It was the way he did it, as if he was waiting for something, like he had all the time in the world. Finally, I made my way to the self-checkout area, hoping that once I paid, I could leave and put the whole thing behind me. As I scanned my items, I kept my eyes peeled, trying to see if he was still around. But when I glanced up, I didn't see him anymore. He had vanished, as if he had never been there at all. Relieved, I finished checking out and grabbed my bags, ready to leave. But when I stepped outside, I felt my stomach drop. There he was again. As I walked through the sliding doors and into the parking lot, I felt an odd sense of relief, until I saw him. There he was again, standing in front of my car, staring at me. My heart skipped a beat. How did he know which car was mine? I glanced around, quickly taking in the empty spaces around me. There were no other cars parked close to mine. It didn't make sense. My breath caught in my throat. Was he waiting for me? I froze, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to run back inside the store, find an employee, or even call the police. But that seemed drastic, and I didn't want to make a scene. What if I was just overreacting? What if he was simply waiting for someone else, and this was all just a coincidence? But as I stood there, paralyzed by indecision, the man didn't move. His eyes were locked on me, unblinking, as if he was expecting something. My pulse raced as my mind raced through the possibilities. Was he following me for a reason? What did he want? I took a deep breath and started walking toward my car, trying to keep my pace calm, though every step felt heavy, like I was walking through molasses. I couldn't take my eyes off him. He was still staring, still unmoving, as I closed the distance between us. By the time I reached my car, I was shaking. I fumbled with the keys, struggling to unlock the door, my hands trembling. I slid into the driver's seat, quickly locking the doors behind me. But as I started the engine, I could feel his eyes on me. I glanced in my rearview mirror one last time. There he was, standing there in the lot, staring at me as I drove away. I didn't stop to look back, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. As I drove away from Walmart, my mind was racing. The road ahead was quiet. The only sound in the car was the hum of the engine. But inside, I was anything but calm. The man's face, his eyes, those eyes that never left me, kept replaying in my mind. My stomach twisted with unease, and I couldn't stop asking myself the same questions. Who was he? Why was he following me? I told myself that maybe it was just a coincidence, that he was simply another strange person in the world who had nothing better to do. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. It wasn't just the fact that he had followed me. It was the way he had stared at me, like he was waiting for something, like he knew exactly where I was going and what I was doing. It felt intentional. It felt like I was being watched, like I was the one being hunted. As I turned onto my street, I felt my shoulders tense, my gaze constantly flicking to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him there. But the road behind me was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Was I just being paranoid? Or had something truly strange happened? That night, I lay awake in bed, the darkness pressing down on me. The questions kept swirling in my mind, unanswered. What if I hadn't noticed him at all? What if he was still out there watching me? What if I had missed something important? I wanted to believe it was over, but a part of me knew I couldn't shake that nagging feeling that the man wasn't done with me. Not yet. And the worst part? I never saw him again. But the memory of those eyes watching me from the parking lot stayed with me. Always.